All right, Buffalo Bills fans, welcome to another episode of The Walkthrough. I'm your host, Anthony Marino. Happy to be here with you once again, talking everything Buffalo Bills, and of course, happy to be part of the Overreaction Sports Network. Today's show brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, and again, what we thought might be a quiet offseason for the Buffalo Bills, heading up to the Combine and free agency and the draft and all those fun things that you normally look forward to each and every year. Well, you know it's been a busy couple of weeks. If you were watching the show last week, you know that we talked a lot about the different coaching candidates, kind of how everything went down with Sean McDermott, the press conference with Terry Pegula and Brandon Beane. And I, for one, I don't think I was expecting there to be a new head coach named by the time we were doing this week's show. I thought maybe they'd wait for Clint Kubiak. Maybe they'd take their time doing some second interviews. And that certainly was not the case, right? As the reports came out last week on Tuesday, that it started to trickle out that Joe Brady was going to be the next head coach of the Buffalo Bills. And it was interesting as that news broke, got a text from a friend, like many of you probably did. It just said, God, I hope that isn't true. And of course, like I'm tied up with something, so I have no idea what context is that he's talking about. Of course, thinking that the team has announced who their head coach would be. And you're just sitting, waiting with a little bit of trepidation, I guess, to find out who that new head coach would be for the Buffalo Bills. You know, get to a break later on, you see the reports that Joe Brady will be the next head coach for the Bills. And I think it's understandable that there was a lot of mixed emotions from Buffalo Bills fans at the time, myself included. You know, you go through it and, right, you even think to the week before, and it seemed like there were two very distinct camps, right? That either, hey, I like Sean McDermott, I like what he's done, I like how he's built this franchise back from the abyss, I'm okay with him staying as head coach. And those people that really, I would probably say since like 13 seconds, have been like, the Bills need to make a change, right? I mean, there seemed to be kind of two extremes with this. And you all know I was good with Sean McDermott staying. Like when I watched the loss to the Broncos, it's certainly not something that I put on him. And that's okay. So, right, you go to leading up to last week's show and you're processing just the fact of just like, God, they made a change. I don't love the way this looked. Okay, but of course you're going to accept it, right? You're a Buffalo Bills fan. This is what you do. You've gone through adversity before. Like, yeah, maybe a change was needed. Like, that's okay. You wrap your head around that. Like, hey, we need to do something different here. And then you start, doing your research on all the candidates. And certainly there was not one, at least from what I would see online and talking to friends or for myself, that was just this like, oh, slam dunk. This is the guy that we have to have. Like, there wasn't that hot name out there. Thinking back to last year, right? I mean, Ben Johnson kind of being the name that was available when it came to coaching searches. So, again, you go through all that, you're looking at these pieces, they're still doing interviews, even after, the AFC and NFC championship game. And you're thinking to yourself, again, this is going to take a little bit of time and all that conversation around Clint Kubiak. And then I get that text and immediately see the news about Joe Brady. And maybe like some of you, and listen, maybe you felt that way, maybe you didn't. Like, you can get in the comments section here if you're watching on YouTube and let me know how you were feeling at the moment. But I'll admit, like, at first it was a bit of disappointment. And I don't say it in like any horrible way. Like, certainly I'd had some frustrations with Joe Brady in the offense throughout the season. I had frustrations with Sean McDermott, and I had frustrations with the defense. So listen, that is something that would certainly happen. And once you started to get through it, it's like, okay, let me just sort of look at this with a little bit of a fresh perspective. And as time from the announcement on Tuesday, when you first got that news, leading up to the press conference, you start to think yourself, all right, this is our head coach. I mean, I even put something out on Twitter, and it was just saying, like, I hope that Joe Brady is the greatest coach in the history of the NFL. Because regardless if it's the person I wanted or someone else or the person you wanted or whatever it is, really doesn't make a difference, right? At this point, he's the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. And there's nothing that I want more than for him to be successful. And I imagine that you feel the same too, right? It's not about what his offense was in the past, any of these types of things. Like, you want him to be the best he can absolutely be. And by being the best he can absolutely be, I mean bringing a Super Bowl to Buffalo. That is what this is all about. So regardless of what you thought, who you wanted, any of those things, I don't think there's anyone that's going to disagree that's a Bills fan that we want Joe Brady to be the most successful coach in the NFL. That's it. That's what it comes down to. And I think even for anyone that might have been on the fence before the press conference, then when you got a chance to see that, I felt that his energy was just infectious, right? The kind of the raw emotion that was there, the ability to pull it together, the chance to talk about, who he is, talk about family, talk about Sean McDermott, which I certainly appreciated that he took the time to just recognize like that these past 9 years mattered and to share his love for Sean McDermott. I thought it was extremely classy. I thought it's something that should have happened the week before. It did not. That's fine. Because for Joe Brady to do that, like that's where we are moving forward. And to me, it's all about moving forward. That's what it has to be at this time. His energy is infectious. And I think you hear some of the comments, you hear some of the reporting. Tyler Dunn had a good piece. I mean, obviously, he's covered Sean McDermott and, some of the things that might not be the highlights on his resume, let's just say, and maybe McDermott could be a little tightly wound. I would hear like, he'd have his entire day scheduled in 15-minute increments. Like we know from his background, extremely disciplined throughout his entire career. And listen, for some people, that helps to make them incredibly successful. He has been incredibly successful. But sometimes maybe there is a need for a change. Alec Anderson, had some comments that I was just like, all right, man, like, let's just say he, maybe in his opinion, things were a little too tightly wound throughout the locker room. I don't have the quote here, and even if I did, I wouldn't read it. So you can find it on your own on the internet. But again, watching that press conference, seeing the things post press conference, it's just like, okay, I can feel optimistic. And that's good, right? Like we're fans, right? Like you're going to have a lot of emotion that ties into the team. And from what took place with the emotion to how the team lost to the Denver Broncos, to the coach being fired, to the press conference on Wednesday, to then all of a sudden, oh, you're promoting someone from within. Like, yeah, there were a lot of different emotions that took place. And that's okay. Like it's okay, right? It gives us something to talk about. It gives me something to talk about, to come on the air with all of you. Like we'll get to free agency and roster build and the prospects and mock drafts and all that fun stuff. We will get to all that stuff in the future. But for right now, this is what it really comes down to. But I feel that sense of optimism. I'm enjoying it. If you haven't heard it yet, Joe Brady was on with Ryan Fitzpatrick, the Fitz and Wit podcast. And, most of the podcasts I listen to are Buffalo Bills centric, right? I mean, all the shows we have here on the Overreaction Sports Network, Locked On Bills with Joe Marino and the Bruce exclusive. And of course, Talking Buffalo with Pat Moran. Like I kind of immerse myself in those first. Shout with Perino and Talbot, the centered on Buffalo with Eric Wood. Always Game Day in Buffalo with Sal and Matt Beauvais. It's like I don't want to leave anybody out at this point, but you kind of get where I'm going with that. So there's not a ton of national podcasts that I listen to, but I like to listen to Fitz and Wit. Obviously, Ryan Fitzpatrick, they talk about the Bills enough that it certainly makes sense. But just kind of a natural way of these two former players that don't take themselves too seriously, but really can get into, talking about ball, talking about fans, talking about things that kind of resonate with me. And they had Joe Brady on the show earlier this week, and it just was a really good perspective because, it gave you a chance to kind of get to understand his philosophy a little bit more, to kind of get to know him as a head coach a bit more. And those two, they had some genuine excitement, and I like that. And I just thought it was one of those things. If you haven't checked it out yet, I would certainly encourage you to do so. But for all of us that we look at things right now, like there is that sense of optimism. And of course, I want to know what you're feeling. Like you said, if you're watching on the YouTube side, make sure you get in the comments. I mean, listen, while you're at it, make sure you like, make sure you comment, make sure you subscribe, make sure you share. All those things help us reach more Buffalo Bills fans. But I kind of want to get a pulse for where the fan base is. Maybe you had a similar trajectory to me of like this weird roller coaster of emotions, and I usually don't get too emotional with this stuff. I got a little emotional around the Phillip Rivers thing. That's a little off kilter, but that's neither here nor there at this point. But for Joe Brady and the Buffalo Bills, it is a new day, but with the ability to keep some consistency. So I think will be most interesting for him. And whether it was with Brian Dable or then with Ken Dorsey and Joe Brady, there was always that like, oh well, McDermott wants them to be a conservative. McDermott wants it to be a run game. He's kind of putting the shackles on the pass game. Well, that's not the case anymore. And now we're going to get the opportunity to find out, was McDermott really limiting what Joe Brady could do with the offense, or is it a situation where no, what we saw was Joe Brady's offense, and it's going to be a continuation of that moving forward. He will still be calling the plays. I found that to be a little bit interesting because when you talk about hiring a CEO type, if he's still going to be calling the plays, is that a little bit too much on his plate for a first-time head coach? I hope not. We will find out soon enough, and we'll talk about some of the hires that he's made in just a little bit. But, again, you go through with this, it's going to be interesting that some of the hires that have come out, but where things will go. But again, what is that offense going to look like? And I think we will find out pretty soon if it's like, listen, it looks a little bit more of a, vertical passing game than we've seen in the past, maybe less bubble screens, maybe, a little bit less in the run game and maybe utilizing James Cook in the passing game. We will find out at the beginning of this season. But that had always been a thing throughout the Sean McDermott era, that he wanted to kind of have a little bit more of a ground and pound approach and emphasize on that run game, just kind of a narrative from the fans. Well, now with Joe Brady being the head coach, we will get an idea to see what that really looks like for us. Now, I want to talk about some of those new coaching hires. But before we do, got to recognize our friends at Anchor Bar and thank them for all the support. Of course, it's the home of the original chicken wing, and it's the place to watch all of your favorite sporting events. Listen, now that the Bills are done, the Sabres are red hot, so you can check out any Sabres hockey at Anchor Bar locations. Of course, plenty of college and NBA basketball right now. And you can go to anchorbar.com to see all the locations and info on online ordering. Of course, they got some of the best chicken wings around. They're deep fried and sauced to your liking, over 24 different varieties and rubs that you can choose from. Hey, maybe you want to get something on the side with your wings. They've got appetizers, tenders, burgers, pizza, beef on weck, you name it, a full menu that you can check out. And again, go to anchorbar.com for all the details there. 16 locations across the country, 3 new spots in Tucson, Arizona, Frisco, Texas, and Raleigh, North Carolina. And the weekly reminder to everybody at Anchor Bar, let's get one here in Albany, New York sometime soon. That would certainly be great. So big shout out to everyone at Anchor Bar. And of course, big shout out to everyone here at the Overreaction Sports Network. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. I said that to you before, but, not just so you get the walkthrough every week, but you get the shows from Joe Miller, John Fina, Zig Fracassi, Jerry Ostrowski, Dan Freddy. We got you covered throughout the offseason, continuing to talk Buffalo Bills, and just some great perspective from all those guys as well. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about some of the hires that have taken place so far. This is certainly a piece, right? Whoever the new head coach was going to be, who they're going to bring in to fill out their staff. And, jumping on here on Saturday morning, some additional news might break throughout the weekend. If it does, we'll kind of get that to you as soon as possible. But, as we look at this, kind of 3 reported hires at this time. First one is Pat Meyer, who is the offensive line coach for the team. And, he is a guy, and I think when you talk about one of the bigger losses for the team this year, Aaron Kromer's retirement as the offensive line coach definitely had people a little bit shook. And that took place even before Sean McDermott was fired, that the announcement that Kromer was going to retire. Well, Pat Meyer comes in, right? I mean, he's worked with Joe Brady in Carolina when he was offensive coordinator for a couple of years. He worked under Aaron Kromer in the past for 2 years. So as you look at that, right, he comes from the Aaron Kromer coaching tree. And there's certainly been a ton of credit given to Coach for his work in the past in developing that offensive line, developing that run game. Certainly for him, hope that he can, enjoy his retirement. Maybe he'll come back here and there as a consultant to add some perspective. But it's Pat Meyer coming in to be that offensive line coach for the Bills, and hopefully he can kind of build on what Kromer has done with that O-line. And like I said, we're going to talk free agency coming up. I mean, the Bills have two key pieces, two starters on the line that are free agents, and David Edwards and Connor McGovern. So it will be interesting to see what the makeup of the starting lineup will look like and what Pat Meyer can do to kind of build on that great success that took place under Coach Aaron Kromer. Another one, Jeff Rogers comes in as a special teams coordinator from Arizona. His actual title was assistant head coach and special teams coordinator. He'd been the coordinator since 2018, has actually been the assistant head coach under 3 different head coaches. So, I think when you talk about leadership and some of the credit there, like, when new coaches come in, it's one thing for them to keep a special teams coordinator, but to keep that title of assistant head coach, and listen, I'll just be real frank with you. I don't know a ton about special teams coordinators. Like those are some deep cuts when you talk about some of your research and what you're going with and looking into what the team can be. But there has been a lot of positives around Rodgers. Things got, I think, a little bit shaky in Arizona this past season, thanks to some unfortunate injuries. But for him, has a pretty proven track record and will come in as the new special teams coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. One that folks definitely, most interested in, Pete Carmichael Jr. coming in as the offensive coordinator. He is an offensive assistant on Sean Payton's staff with the Denver Broncos. He was the offensive coordinator for Sean Payton for like 15 years down in New Orleans. And it's where I like the hire, and I'm not saying like, oh my gosh, Pete Carmichael Jr., I know all about his work in the past. No, it's not that. But he has worked as an offensive coordinator under a head coach that calls the plays, right? I mean, Sean Payton, incredibly successful in what he has been able to do, having won a Super Bowl, and, Carmichael being able to work with a coach that's going to call the plays, being able to, work with the team, right, throughout the week, within the meeting room, throughout game planning, all of those pieces. He's got that type of experience. And of course, he's worked with Joe Brady in the past, as Brady was part of the Sean Payton coaching tree. So for him to come in 54 years old brings a depth of experience. And again, when we looked at that, right, we would talk guys like Davis Webb. We talk some of these bigger names, like, is there an opportunity? Is Brian Dable going to come back as offensive coordinator? Once that it was announced that Joe Brady was going to call plays, you knew that names like that probably went out the window, right? That, Brian Dable's not going to come back to Buffalo as an offensive coordinator and not call plays himself. And that's that's no discredit to anyone. That's just kind of the reality when, that goes in. And sometimes when you hire a head coach that was an offensive coordinator before. So you have someone in Pete Carmichael Jr. that comes in, again, with a wealth of experience. And I think that will bring a level of consistency and steadiness maybe to Joe Brady as a first-time head coach. Because when you come in, it's a big jump. Like, I don't say it in any sort of way that like should come as a shock to anyone, right? But you've got to be focused on both sides of the ball now. Fitzpatrick called BS with him on the podcast I was referencing earlier that you should listen to, because, Joe Brady's like saying, like, you're not going to celebrate with the defense when Josh Allen throws an interception. Like, you're going to be upset about something like that. So bringing someone in like Pete Carmichael Jr., again, it gives you that experience of working with someone like Sean Payton, but working with a head coach that is your offensive play caller. I think that's something that'll certainly work well. The biggest question, and again, kind of keeping an eye on things to see when the news shakes out, is who the Bills are going to hire as their defensive coordinator. You look at it, the early speculation was Jim Leonard would potentially leave the Denver Broncos to become the defensive coordinator here. There's just been a lot of speculation on it, no report of any kind of interview yet. And I say yet because it's just like, all right, when it comes from Adam Schefter and it's out there throughout the week, like I don't think he's just making this up. This isn't fan casting, right? Where that's who I would like to see become the defensive coordinator in any way, shape, or form. Leonard, he interviewed with the Chargers, did not get that job. Supposedly interviewing with the Ravens for their defensive coordinator job as well. But that is a spot that he would be going to and not calling the plays because they have a head coach that will be calling their defensive plays for them. So if he were to come to Buffalo, obviously he would be calling the shots on the defensive side of the ball. And that's the one name, at least that I have seen so far, that has been linked per a report. Other two names that have been there, Raheem Morris, again, I think that's out there of like, hey, this is someone that's on the market, has had great success as a defensive coordinator, brings head coaching experience, could come in and bring an aggressive style of defense to Buffalo. Yeah, that's out there, but I haven't seen any sort of report linking Joe Brady to Raheem Morris or anything along those lines. The other is with Jim Schwartz. Jim Schwartz, it looked like for a little bit that he might be named the head coach in Cleveland. That did not happen. And when that did not happen, he was understandably emotional, said that he was done with the Browns, like I think said goodbye to a lot of people in the building. And it seems like it didn't end well. Now he's still under contract in Cleveland. So it's not like he can just, he'd have to be let out of that contract. And people, talk about his aggressive style. You can look back to the success that he had with the Bills as their defensive coordinator in the past and say, oh man, that would get away from that soft zone coverage that Sean McDermott would be known for and more of an aggressive style that, can really get to the quarterback and see what could take place there. While I get that with Schwartz, again, the contract piece, but Jim Schwartz is a big personality too. And for a first-time head coach, like, Joe Brady would have to be ready to deal with a more than just a fiery defensive coordinator. So I'm not sure if that, and again, that I think is us as fans talking about Jim Schwartz as a possibility and less of anything like you said, he's under contract in Cleveland. So it's really just fan speculation at this point. So Jim Leonard is that one name that I'm certainly keeping an eye on. I would love to see take place. I think when you talk about that, kind of that ascending star as a defensive coordinator, I think he would, certainly bring an aggressive style to Buffalo that many of us have been clamoring for. So, but, let me know in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts are, who you would like to see as a defensive coordinator. Like maybe you've got some thoughts. Maybe there's a name outside of Leonard and Schwartz and Morris that I haven't mentioned here today that you have seen. So it'll certainly be something to keep an eye on, certainly something to watch. And I'm excited to see how Joe Brady's staff comes together. It's been a crazy couple of weeks for all of us. But honestly, for me, it's nice to be able to get on here with all of you and kind of talk about the squad and where things are going. It's almost therapeutic in some ways. And I hope that you've enjoyed it too, because it's always a lot of fun getting on with you guys, and hopefully you will come back next week for the next episode of the walkthrough. So I'm going to get out of here for now. Go Bills, and I'll see y'all next time. Take care.